Welcome, and we're going to be continuing to talk about the virtue of prudence, which is the practice of choosing the right methods to achieve worthy goals. And we ended last class with some of the applications of prudence, mainly that we know that we are dealing with prudence when we're talking about ethics, the rules or the way of operating within a particular community. Whether we're talking about the word appropriate. If something is appropriate, often what we're talking about is this a good method to achieve what you're trying to do? Often appropriate doesn't directly relate to right and wrong, but it can, especially if something that's inappropriate is continued over time. It can really lend to something really harmful. The third one is politics. And as we are in an election year and an election is coming up in the next few weeks, this is a really important one to understand really well. And politics is a strategy to achieve peace, justice, freedom, and general flourishing or well-being, both for the individual and for the community as a whole. Now, this is not necessarily what people always intend when they talk about politics, but when we talk about it, we're going to be focusing on politics as strategy, as a way, a method to achieving, protecting, supporting individual rights and the well-being of the community. And so this is really important because oftentimes in our society, we see groups proposing one possible strategy while recognizing that or asserting that groups have very different values, very different things they're trying to achieve. And I'm going to argue that in a society, we should have similar values, the things that we're trying to achieve. I hope that the list that I provided here, which has some influence from the U.S.'s founding documents, I hope that these are general values, and that the difference between individuals and their politics should be about the strategies to achieve it, much more so than the values that we hold. That there can be great good in looking at a variety of strategies to achieve these values, because if there is a lot of strategies discussed, there's a good chance that a good one would win out. And I also phrase it this way because when we view politics this way, it can allow you to have reasonable disagreements with people and without needing to vilify one or another group. And I don't know about you, but this is something that is desperately needed in my soul. And so to give a quick example, we look at the problem of houselessness in Portland. This is not a surprising issue to many of you, and there are many factors that might cause it. And some of the things that we might agree on when we think about these values is that people should have the ability or the agency to, and when I use the term agency, I mean the ability to choose or to do things in order to enact something, to make something happen. They should have the agency to feed themselves, to clothe themselves, and to house themselves. And often this is connected to agency to work. Now, at the same time, we recognize that that for those that cannot do so themselves, that society has a responsibility of care for those at the margins of society to help them where they cannot get these things on their own. And just to be really clear, we do this for small children. We do not expect them to procure their own food, clothing, and shelter. That this is a common societal expectation that society should support those who cannot provide for themselves. And where the issue is about the options to do these things, that society should maximize the agency of individuals and communities so that they can do these things themselves if they are able. So I realize that's very technical, but essentially, when we think about houselessness, there are a variety. Like, people should generally see that this is not a good thing that we have many of our brothers and sisters who are living on the street, who face dangers associated with that on a daily basis, who, as part of this, they suffer from food insecurity and things like this. And so this is really important to look at. And there are many strategies that are brought forward and are possible. So for instance, I asked, I brought up that society should care for those on the margins of society. And one of the questions is, who is society in that statement? Is it the federal government? Is it the state government? Is it the city government? Is it the county government? Is it the people's families themselves? Is it their collection of friends? Is it churches and nonprofits? Is it some combination of them? And when we look at addressing this, how do we address housing, work programs, mental health? How do we address healthcare, childcare, and various other factors? And all of this goes into the way this could be approached. And arguably, there are many strategies that might be necessary, and there are strategies that can be more or less effective at supporting our brothers and sisters who currently live on the streets, and building up our community as a whole. I'm going to move over here. So when we think about prudence, it's valuable to see it in a 3-step process. And it's really important to know where you're at, and also to know where you're supposed to be. And I say this because people tend to have a real comfort with one of these steps above the others. And that's okay to recognize, but it's important to really work on having all 3 as part of your practice, because that is what prudence entails. So first of all, you've got the consider stage, where you need to take time to consider. You need to brainstorm. This is a good time to ask questions, to delve deeper, to really widen the scope, to look broadly. And this is really important, because the wider the scope, the more you look at it and the deeper you look at it, the better able you will be to make effective decisions. And one of the weaknesses with staying here is, for instance, some people feel really comfortable here and they don't feel comfortable making decisions. And this could lead to just people just talking about problems or talking about issues or bringing awareness to issues without actually ever doing something. And this is important to make it to step 2. Step 2 is you got to decide that yes, people often want to play devil's advocate and look at things from a lot of different angles, but eventually things have to get done. And it's really important that after going through a process of questioning, brainstorming, and widening the scope, eventually in life, for most things, you need to eventually make a decision. And you're going to need to do something. And this is interesting because some people feel really comfortable here, that they'll hear of a topic and they just instantly have a decision. And this can be good in that they do actually do something, but the odds of doing the best thing or having a really solid method or reasoning or even choosing a good thing is lower because you skipped the consider phase. And both of these are really important. Now, it's rare that someone will be really good at the third stage without also being good at the second. And this one is follow through. And this is arguably the most important for prudence, that having a good process of consideration and decision needs to be able to actually make it happen practically in the world. And so, but all three of these steps are absolutely necessary. And yeah, and these are crucial, that you got to widen your scope, you eventually need to make some decisions, and then you need to have a process or a method to make it happen. And so one of the things you might think about as you consider this is, where are you most comfortable? And to put it into practical terms, when you are in a small group for a school project, when that small group first meets, where do you tend to sit? Are you like, okay, let's just make a decision and let's just go for it? Or are you like, okay, let's make sure that we hear from everybody. Let's talk about all the issues. Or, as I said, 2 and 3 tend to kind of go together. And although at the same time, if you don't have a good consider phase, the odds of having a really solid follow through are lower, because you don't necessarily know what you're talking about or what is entailed to make something happen in practice. Okay. So in this, I'm going to move towards the middle. In each of these virtues, we're going to be talking about the value of rules in them, because it's valuable that we understand rules without seeing rules as our end goal. And so one of the important things when we think about incorporating prudence into our lives is that adhering to rules is part of ethics, that ethics are the particular rules or methods or processes of a given community. And so I, as a teacher, am part of the teaching community, and I bind myself as a teacher to the ethics of teaching. I teach at LaSalle, and so I bind myself to the ethics of LaSalle. I am a U.S. citizen, and so I bind myself to the ethics of the U.S. government. And so these are all really important to recognize. And kind of similarly, like if I enter someone's house, I bind myself to the ethics of their house, the way that their house operates. And so it's valuable to obey or support these external ethics. We talked about that with integrity. And it's also really important when you think about prudence, that prudence is a lot about methods, is to build your own rules or systems for yourself as you try to build your character, as you try to develop the habits and mindsets for the person that you want to become. And this is especially crucial for things that are difficult. For things that are difficult, we tend to already have processes that make it more difficult for us to do what we might want to do. And so building rituals and routines and checklists for things that we find difficult to make them more effective is good prudence, and it is a good way of training your elephant. So for instance, if you have difficulty with procrastinating, building a ritual or a routine or a checklist to help you avoid procrastinating will be helpful. When you think about creating a routine, you want to think about what do you do first? So for instance, when you're given an assignment, what do you do first? And the goal is to attach a new thing that you do first when the initial cue occurs. So for instance, if you struggle with your phone, one of the things that I've tried to do, somewhat unsuccessfully, is not look at my phone first thing in the morning and looking at it last thing at night. And I'm gotten a lot better at not looking at it last thing at night, partially because I have a book right next to my bed. And so when I think like, oh, I need to go to sleep right now, I'd grab the book, because I know that the light from the phone will keep me awake longer and will keep me in a kind of in a mild anxious state and harder to sleep. Whereas reading the book, I'll read like 3 pages and I'll be like, ugh, and then I'll turn off the light and go to bed. And so that's a more effective rule that I read before bed. No one imposed this rule on me. I impose it on myself because I value reading and I value sleeping well. And so these are things that you can do for difficult things. And I recommend them. Like, one of the things that's pretty common for people is dealing with procrastination or dealing with phone addiction. And I'll say something about procrastination is that for some people, planning the way that they procrastinate can be effective. So for instance, I like to get a lot, like one of the things that's beneficial about procrastination is you can get a lot of work done in a short amount of time. And so for instance, I try to come into work very early on Mondays, sometimes at like 6:30 a.m. And with us starting at 9, that gives me 2.5 hours of solid uninterrupted work time at the start of the week. And I find that if I do that, rather than trying to do a lot of stuff during the weekend, I can accomplish way more in those 2.5 hours than I would if I did things earlier. And this is a routine or a practice that I do to kind of recognize my internal procrastination and use it to good effect. Another thing to pay attention to within prudence is the difference between intent and impact. Oftentimes when we think about right versus wrong, we tend to think about our intentions, and that's not a bad thing. That if I'm trying to do the right thing, if I'm thinking the right thing in my mind, then whatever I've done, it was a good thing. And that's part of it. But when we think about prudence, prudence is a lot about the method. So it doesn't matter that you had a worthy goal. I mean, it matters. You should have a worthy goal, but the method matters too. And so if you have a good intention and you realize that the impact is bad, the goal is not necessarily to revisit your goal. What you should do is revisit your methods. And so one example would be, and this is really important when we think about methods, is looking at racism within the United States. And one of the things that is really important is kind of this shift, at least among like white culture around colorblindness. That growing up, I was kind of taught that trying to consciously be colorblind was a good thing. And when I think about the intention behind that, it was that, if as I interact with anyone, the intention is that I see people, I just see people. I don't see or stereotype someone as a particular race with a certain set of stereotypes that might go along with that. And so if that is the intention of someone, that intention is good. Now, people of color have been saying this for a long time, although the voices have only really been heard by a lot of people who are white only over the last few years, that trying to be colorblind has a bad impact, in that it's a conscious effort to neglect a part of someone's self and their culture. And that by doing so, this contributes to a bias that can actually allow for greater inequalities. And so when we think about that, the intention of wanting to treat all people equally or well, regardless of race, is a good intention. But from the people most impacted, a lot of the voices that we're hearing in society are saying that this effort, although perhaps well-intentioned, is having a negative impact that's contributing to negative results. And so this is something to think about. And this is something I don't want to just declare. I want us to discuss, even though this will probably be in the form of some sort of Edpuzzle or Loom. Okay, so that is all for what prudence is. And we've looked at it from a variety of different angles. And I want to end, obviously, with some practices. What can you do to improve your prudence? Now, the first thing is doing things that almost always yield good outcomes is good. That, for instance, reading books will contribute to your knowledge. It will build better focus. For many people, it's a source of relaxation. It can really center you, and you'll learn new vocabulary. There's pretty much no downside to reading more, and so do it. And similarly, meditation. Meditation is a really solid tool to train the elephant, so to speak. It can provide clarity to the mind. It can provide a sense of peace, and you can have more clarity about the differences between what your rider wants and what the elephant wants. It also, for us Christians, we see meditation as not merely a focus on the self, but it's also a tool to listen to and be close to God, be close to like the foundation of all reality. And this is a good thing. And so definitely recommend that you meditate. Similarly, exercise. People need to exercise in order to be healthy. Exercise releases endorphins. For many people, they see it as like a way to release stress. I know for myself, if I go outside and I play some tennis right after work, I'm able to shed a lot of the stress from the workday. And so this is really good. Definitely recommend exercising. Similarly, journaling is a really good way to process emotions, to process ideas, to process your thoughts. It's also a good way to maintain memories as they eventually get deleted from our brains. All of this is good. And so I recommend that you do all of these things. I think recommending starting with like 10 minutes a day is really solid. I try to do 10 minutes of all of them, but exercise at the beginning of the day and try to do some exercise at the end. Okay. Similarly, the next practice is you need to have solid people around you. As we talked about at the beginning of the course, the 3 pillars of the 3 pillars of character formation are your habits, your virtues, your community, and the stories that you believe. And so you have some choice as to the voices, the influences in your life. And so paying attention to your community and starting to build it intentionally can be a really helpful practice of prudence. And so I have some guidelines that are really helpful, that it's a good idea to look for a balance between mentors, and these are people that teach you, that help you, that lead you, that guide you, peers who are with you in the work, and with you kind of at the same stage of life. And also it's valuable to have some people that you mentor or that you serve. And although people can move in and out of these various categories, most people tend to naturally go towards their peers because they have similar experience. But consciously choosing to find mentors and consciously choosing to serve others who don't have the same interests as you can be a really effective way of building a more flourishing community of very different people rather than a more narrow community of people with just similar experiences. And kind of similarly, even within that, once you have that kind of balance, it's still important to really be intentional about how much time do I spend in my community, family, friends, mentors, those I serve, and then also those who are outside my community. Because when we think about the consider phase, it's really important to broaden your horizons and to also like be able to make good decisions. And the more different experiences that you come into contact with, the better your decision making will become. That will make you a more prudent person. And so doing this intentionally rather than just letting it happen to you is an effective use of prudence. And the reason I have this picture here is because I see this a lot, especially in soccer, is that if you are a soccer player, you play soccer with your peers. There are the people on your team. You have your coaches, who are your mentors. And many people also will coach like a 6, 7, 8-year-old soccer team or ref on the side. And that is that threefold balance. Usually you have mostly peers, and you'll have a lot of people perhaps that you serve, and a few mentors. And that's really good. Okay, last thing, and this one is not so generally focused on prudence. It is more on moral and also religious issues. That the goal generally is that in the consider phase, you need to develop a wide range of resources. That if you're only hearing things that you want to hear, you need to hear from more sources. And I've organized these partially in a fun acronym because I love memorizing things through acronyms. I consider it good prudence. And the acronym is CRESTPO. I tried to find a better one, but I couldn't. And essentially what you do, and this one kind of connects to practice too, is you go to, like if you're trying to figure out what's good or what's right or what you should do, going to your community, talking to the people around you, be like, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And going to the good people in your community and talking to them is solid. Reason is as a source. Thinking it through rather than just taking what people say is really important. Thinking about it logically, thinking about it scientifically. This is really important. And then also putting that into dialogue with your own experience. These three things should be a part of the way that you're coming to understand things. And when we, and I mean, I as a Catholic look at what is right, what is good. I look to both scripture and tradition as sources of authority, of truth, and balance those, like put those into conversation with my experience, with reason, with the community. And similarly, I also personally pray about it and consider as part of my relationship with God and part of my reflection on all of these things. And then similarly, depending on what we're talking about, I'd look at other sources like the news, like history, scientific research, literature, etc. There, like the other sources is pretty wide. That you look at what is relevant there in various other studies. And one of the things here is that the more convergence, the more these agree, the more confident we can be that we're coming to a good decision, that we're coming to a true decision. If I pray something and it doesn't agree with scripture, tradition, my experience, reason, community, or other sources, I can be pretty confident that whatever came out of this prayer isn't good. This isn't right. And kind of similarly, like that I start to identify outliers. Like, okay, like this is your experience, but like everything else in reality is pointing to something else. Maybe you should relook at your experience. And so essentially what we're doing is not looking to force things to align to our will, but really looking for convergence. And the more convergence, the more certain we can be of what's good, and then act on that decision. And just a quick note, when we think about scripture, when we think about the Bible and prudence, that when we think about it in terms of using it for decision making or using it as a moral guide, it's important that we do so with a character-based morality rather than an intuition-based or a rule-based. One of the important things about the Bible is that we should view it as a library of books, because that is what it is. There are many, many books in the Bible written by different authors at different time periods. There are different sections with different genres, like, guess what? A library. And so when we say, like, what does the Bible say about this? We are saying, what does the library of Scripture say about this? And the answer is going to almost always be many things, and in a variety of different ways. Some will be narratives, some will be poems, some will be laws, some will be histories. And those don't always provide a clear picture, especially 2,000 years removed from their original audience. And so oftentimes, if you're coming at the Bible from a rule-based morality, you'll tend to see it as like an operator's manual. In fact, there's an acronym for the Bible that's like, what is it? Oh no, Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth Bible. And that's seeing it as an operation manual. And the thing is that reading a story about Abraham and his wife and Hagar, his slave, like, this is not necessarily going to yield for you a clear way that you should operate your life. It won't necessarily not reveal that, but that we're not treating it as it is. And similarly, a lot of people see the Bible as a law book. And I'll even say that the Torah, which is normally considered the law, is full of narrative. And narratives are not laws. You say, like, what's the law? And I tell you a story, a la Jesus, that it doesn't yield a clear response in a codified way. And this is because the Bible is a library, which yields more to a character base. That I need to look at all these things and really discern the kind of person I'm trying to be, to try to really, like, relate to the character of God and the character of the community that humans should be. And kind of similarly, if I were to go at it to an intuition-based, I owe this to Tim Mackey from the Bible Project. He says that most people, when they go to look at the Bible, they look at it not as a library or not as an operation manual or not as law, but as a yearbook. In that when you get your yearbook, the first thing that you do is look for pictures of yourself. And oftentimes when we go to the Bible, we look for what things have to do with me and what things do I like. And then when you find the quotes that you like or the things that have to do with you, you quote them and you use them to support your preconceived opinions. And so the Bible becomes a tool for your own will rather than a nuanced source that you wrestle with and form your character. And so I hope that this image of Bible as library is helpful to you, and that we should be avoiding Bible as yearbook or Bible as operation manual or Bible as law. Thank you for listening.